Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning. Good afternoon already. Well, I'm delighted to introduce you Dr. Anas Atikriti, the founder and director of the Cordoba Foundation based in London, and the chairman of the Muslim Association of Britain. As Dr. Azmi mentioned, we are going to talk today about has the Arab Spring turned into Islamist winter? And as far as we had such a long delay without any additional introductions, I'm passing the word to Dr. Ahmad Farouk Musa, the chairman of the Islamic Renaissance Front, to start and moderate the discussion.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Julia. Dr. Anas, it's a pleasure to be with you again. And brothers and sisters over here, I guess that this is a very important topic, especially looking at the situation in our country. And initially, when we had Tariq Ramadan over here, it was basically, at the beginning of this the Arab Spring, right, when it was still blooming. There was so much hope, and even Tariq Ramadan wrote the book, The Arab Awakening, right? He prefers the word awakening than Arab Spring. And of course, and I, in my speech during the talk with him at ISTAC, in fact, I said that, the whole idea of this Arab Spring was that, for example, Egypt, Muslim Brotherhood tried to reposition themselves to promote what is known as a civil state instead of an Islamic state. And this idea being brought by the Al-Adalah wal-Hurriyah party, FJP, is Freedom Justice Party, was, I think, very apt, talking about citizenship, talking about good governance, talking about justice and equality, and these are the things that should be addressed as what is known as post-Islamism nowadays. So I guess that this idea of post-Islamism is very important, and in fact that that your compatriot at GMM, Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad, he was being attacked for this particular concept of post-Islamism because he wanted to bring this issue up to the traditionalists within the Islamic Party of Malaysia, but somehow or other it is a very difficult concept for them to comprehend and to appreciate. What more to embrace? So I hope he is here today with us so that it could be a more fruitful discussion. But I believe that he was with you for dinner last night. So I guess probably he had already conveyed whatever he wanted to convey to you. But I think it's very important for us to understand as well this concept of post-Islamism, especially in this current scenario in this country and also in the Middle East. With that, I would like to start this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for waiting for me for so long. My apologies for being late. And I very much appreciate the kindness of IRF for hosting this visit of mine, the last event of which is this. And I'm also grateful to Dr. Azmi Sharom and yourselves here in the University of Malaya for inviting me to speak about this particular topic. And I won't go into too many introductions because I believe that Dr. Ahmad Farouk Musa has outlaid the premise for the importance of this particular topic. But in whatever time is left, I will try to outline the main points of discussion which I think are important and more importantly relevant. From telling a story of whatever happened in Egypt or Tunisia or Libya or Syria or Yemen or the such is fine. And to sort of monitor the movement of history, if you wish, is fine. But even better is if there are certain points which are relevant to our own development, our own existence, whether it be for me, for instance, in the UK, or whether it be for you in Malaysia or far further afield. And I do think that today we live in a world where these national borders have sort of assimilated and melted, and people now have actually really they've gone beyond the nation states, whether it be in virtual terms on social media interactions and the such. People are talking to each other across borders, in fact across continents, and talking about all subjects. There are no boundaries. People who comment today in our media aren't necessarily specialists. I find my son, particularly on Facebook, corresponding with his peers and his friends from Latin America, from Australia, from South Africa, on every single issue, and they're still in their teens. So I think we need to realize that we are affected now because of this coming together, this real concept of the global village, not in terms of just a cliche being used, but in actual terms. We are today a global village. Whatever happens in any corner of the world will resonate to the opposite corner within a matter of minutes, possibly even seconds. And indeed, what's happened from late 2010, let's say 2011, up until now and is still going, is something which is of serious impact for a number of reasons. I'm going to start by stating something which I believe is something that we all know, but I think it's important that we remind ourselves. It's important to recognize that history is not something that is decided by today or yesterday's headlines. However huge and substantial the story was yesterday or the week before, and however spectacular the headline was, that on its own does not make history. That on its own does not create a historical movement, a historical incident that shapes, transforms, or changes history. And therefore, we will find some analysts, particularly politicians, and because the nature of politics is very short term. Politicians are elected into a particular term for 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, and therefore essentially all their efforts go into sustaining themselves, gaining in popularity, making sure that they are also maybe extended into another term. But generally speaking, very few politicians today can afford to think on the next 20 years, simply because their term ends in about 3, 4 years' time. So unfortunately, we live in a world today where politics, particularly politics, is very, very short term. And therefore, it might seem to politicians and to journalists who are working on an hourly deadline that the news that have just occurred, just broken, are incredibly transformative, yet in the whole scheme of things, we need to realize that these incidents are incremental, that they add a grain of sand to the whole pile that will transpire down the line, maybe several years down, maybe several decades down the line. And I also, and again, this, before I enter into the subject, I also remind my own students and the people that I talk to, in that we may live in and witness incidents, and we may be thrust at the very heart of a particular event, which to us at this moment of time seems like it is the most important thing in the world. It is the most important event in the world. Like this is the be-all and end-all. A discussion that we think this is, either the beginning of something new or the end of the world. However, if we think about it, we will realize that 100 years down the line, this substantial event will occupy maybe a few lines in a paragraph, in a whole book, in a volume. It will mean very, very little. Today, when we read about historical events, we flip the pages very casually, but those pages could have been decades of millions of people's lives, which at the time they thought this is the be-all and end-all of the world. But we just flip the page very casually, simply because that is how history works. And very, very few incidents occupy more than a page, more than a chapter. Now, coming back to the Arab Spring, what is important, first of all, and as in every event that Dr. Ahmed Farouk has kindly put me to this particular tour, I've always started by saying that terms are extremely important. Terms and words are very, very important. And I absolutely take Dr. Azmi's introduction in terms of whether the concept of the Arab Spring. Dr. Ahmed Farouk mentioned Tariq Ramadan calling it an awakening. Others called it an uprising. To be perfectly honest, I think that what we need to agree on here is what the concept is, what the meaning is. Because the term itself we can agree or disagree on. I'm using the Arab Spring. I mean, for instance, when I mentioned the Arab Spring in a conference that was held in Tunisia, some Tunisians, this was in 2012 on the first anniversary of the revolution and the uprising in Tunisia. And I was invited officially to attend the ceremonies. And in the Tunisian university I was giving a lecture, and I said Al-Rabi' al-Arabi, the Arab Spring. And some activists, they immediately stood up, young men and women stood up and started to, to protest. And they said, no, it's not Al-Rabi' al-Arabi. It's not an Arab Spring. How could you call it an Arab Spring? We gave so much in blood, we gave so much in pain, we gave so much in suffering, and we're still fighting this revolution. This is a revolution, it's not an Arab Spring. And I'm not there to tell them they're right or they're wrong. They're living the event, they created the event, they were part of the event. So of course there will be a lot of contestations about the term itself and whether this is apt or whether this is more appropriate. However, what I want to start off with is to assert that the Arab Spring, and I'm going to use this coinage because still people recognize what I'm talking about, for the sake of that we know exactly what we're talking about. The Arab Spring is a concept, not an event. This is important because if we refer to the Arab Spring and we summarize it all in terms of an event, i.e. a people rising against authoritarian regimes which had been sitting for decades, then we could say that event is more or less over in Egypt. That event is really stumbling very badly in Libya. That it's okay progressing in Tunisia, but not in line with people's hopes and aspirations when they rose in late 2010, early 2011. However, I think more than being an event, the Arab Spring is a concept, is an idea, within which certain events will take place. As such, it means that even the stumbling of Egypt is part of that concept, becomes a natural phenomenon within that particular concept. As we all know, and those of us who have studied history and look back at the major revolutions that transformed certain countries, possibly even the world, whether it be the French Revolution, whether it be the Russian Revolution, whether it be the real revolutions that created a new existence, a new being, that transformed event, that transformed narratives, that created new shapes and new blocks and new entities. Those revolutions, very few of them, if any, lasted for less than several weeks. Some went through years. In fact, those who documented for the French Revolution, that created the modern European republican state that we have today, that revolution, according to many, lasted for more than 70 years, during which there were several phases. At times, the establishment would announce that khalas, the revolution has been killed off and it's ended, and they would celebrate, and then we would come to a phase where the revolutionaries would announce their victory, and they would storm the palaces and the prison cells and free some prisoners and chop off some heads and the guillotine, and then there would be a reversal of tide. For 70 years, this was on and off. Revolutions that are transformative, truly transformative, they need time. Simply because as the revolutions are happening, the people on both sides are addressing their own positions, are addressing their own beliefs, their core beliefs, their principles and their ideals. This is a very important process. You can't expect someone to rise today, gather around them a few dozen people, maybe even a few hundred people, then hit the streets, and then everything will collapse and we'll open up a new chapter in history just like that. That doesn't happen, because part of the revolution is not just the fall of regimes, and I'm going to come to this. It's actually the transformation that goes within the psyche of societies. the psyche of nations, the consciousness that is being built within the collective, on both sides, in fact, generally, as well as the shaping of all the factors, internal and external, that have an impact on what's happening. Because today, as we see, for instance, as we saw recently in Ukraine, as we're seeing now in various other countries, a revolution today, and because we live in this global village, any kind of uprising is going to be covered by the media, by the world media. Possibly international players will come into play, Americans, Russians, Chinese, so and so, and will have a say in how things are shaped. People may be impacted or affected one way or another, blackmailed, arm twisted, compelled, forced to adopt a particular narrative, a particular stand, or a particular policy. So today, because we live in the world whereby no event can go unnoticed, where we don't need days or weeks for the news to move from one side of the world to the other, the elements that have an impact and have a say on how events take place are immense and very complicated. It's not that easy just to say, well, you know, all today is against the government, so it's very easy to just hit the streets and rise against the government because, you know, it's not that easy, simply because the government is not there alone. It's not just, you know, the 40% or the 50% in parliament that's holding it up. There's a regional dimension, there's an international dimension that also has a say in whether that government stands its ground, gets support, or whether it collapses and falls. So we're talking here about a concept and an idea. And the concept and idea of the Arab Spring, my friends, must never ever, and for those of you who are writing and researching and maybe touch on this, it is not about the fall of certain regimes or dictators, as important as that is. Of course, when you have in a country like Libya, for instance, a leader, a political leader who was leading for more than 40 years, for about 43 years, supported absolutely, with no condition by the international community, by the major powers in the world, having just signed major contracts, energy, security, trade, commerce, immigration, treaties and contracts with major countries, whether it be Italy or France or the UK or America, for 25, 30 years ahead. Bringing up his children, his own sons and daughters, to become the next leaders of the country. Being in absolute total power. And then within a matter of weeks, probably months at the most, being disposed of in the most unceremonious way, with the world watching, is something which is quite shocking. When you have a leader in Egypt, for instance, who is sitting over, he himself might have been in power for more than 30 years. But the regime as a regime was in power since 1956. So more than almost 50 years. And someone who is extremely friendly with all the major leaders in the world. Someone whose country is seen as one of the greatest allies of the West. In fact, for those of you who are following, Egypt, for the past 15 years, was the second largest recipient of American aid every single year after Israel. Every single year, it would receive more than $2 billion in aid. That's besides the subsidized military contracts, the subsidized technical contracts and the such. So, for that person who is a military commander in a country that is ruled by a military authority, a military system, to simply fall within a matter of weeks of, and this is important, of a peaceful, non-armed, popular uprising. Not an army, no tanks, no machine guns, no bombs, is extremely shocking. But we must never ever, and this is my point, we must never ever describe the Arab Spring in terms of the fall of Mubarak or Ben Ali in Tunisia or Gaddafi in Libya. Because these are merely symptoms of the concept. These are side events within the bigger concept, within the bigger event that will transform history. And this is the important point. Now, when you see things within that particular light, all of a sudden, you start to think again about whether the Arab Spring has ended, it's become a winter, it's stumbled, it's going wrong, it's going on a different tangent, or the such. Because you see it in its wider implication. Not as an event that is taking a particular line and whether that line has ended, or whether it's moved or shifted sideways, or in a totally different direction. You see it as a bigger picture, as a canvas, and this canvas can be filled in with all sorts of events, including the fall of these regimes, and including a counter-revolution like we're seeing now in Egypt. This is part and parcel of the concept itself. And the main concept, to be honest, to me at least, is a number of points that I will mention very quickly. It's very important that when we are trying to assess a particular change, to assess how substantial and even how positive or negative that change is, it's important to set a benchmark, a sort of date, a cutoff point, and then assess what was before and what came after. Okay, that makes sense. So to see whether you've made any progress or whether you've gone back, whether the change is positive or whether it's negative. And to assess the size of change. Is it, just by 5% or 10%, or is it a substantial change? And it's very, very important that we assess where that particular region of the world was before 2011 and where it became after 2011. Very, very quickly. For those of you who know anything about the Arab world, who have seen or studied or researched the Arab world, I come from that part of the world. Most of my work is done about that part of work, academic as well as non-academic work. And I can tell you this, a very, very basic concept. The Arab world up until 2011, generally speaking, I'm talking here about 22 nations, starting from the Persian Gulf, the Gulf states, eastwards to Mauritania and Morocco at the Atlantic Ocean westwards. 22 nations, all sharing a language, all sharing quite a similar cultural background, made up of a variety of ethnicities, but sharing a faith, generally speaking, sharing a faith. Arabs and Arabic being the dominant language, a tradition, a mindset, and also regional geopolitical challenges. By far and large, when you talk about that particular region, whether you talk about Libya or whether you talk about, let's say, Oman, eastwards, you're talking about not an identical, but a very similar set of geopolitical challenges, a very similar set of regional elements that shape and make who these countries are, what the people are, what kind of stand they take, and what kind of future prospects politically, economically, strategically they have. Now this area also shared something extremely similar, and that is for the past century, possibly even longer, but for the past century particularly, and since the shaping of the map of the region, according to the agreement of Sykes-Picot, the two foreign ministers of Britain and France, respectively, in the aftermath of the First World War, who simply drew lines in that map, which was it was one map under the Ottoman rule, and people used to travel eastwards, westwards, without the need to stop at any checkpoint, without the need to produce visas or the such, simply because it was one dominion. All of a sudden, they became 22 separate entities. Now, you have to realize that the common thread that ruled them all is that over the past century, they were all ruled by authoritarian, dictatorial, totally non-democratic regimes. Through various phases, those monarchies or sultanates or the such, some of them changed into revolutionary neo-national states, such as what we saw in Syria, in Iraq during the 50s and 60s, in Libya during again during the 60s, Egypt, for instance, during the 50s, becoming more, the kind of secular nation state built on revolutions, governed by military sort of commands and the such, which then all, in one shape or another, changed into countries that were ruled by dictators, one way or another, whatever, whether you're talking about a king, a prince, a sultan, a president, a prime minister, a commander-in-chief, head of the revolution, call them what they may, all together, the people of the Arab world became people who cannot express themselves, who don't know the meaning of political opposition. Human rights and freedoms were at a total loss. There was an element of backwardness. In fact, I read several times, not just once, and I'm pretty sure that you also have, that the Arab world, that particular region, had only two things to offer to the world. And I remember being hurt by this, but at the same time not being able to argue against it. And those two things were violence and wars, and immense riches with which, either lusts and desires of rich people were satisfied, or some incredibly insane investments were made, not inside that particular region, but around the world, and particularly in the West. That was the only thing that these two, this particular region, made up of more than 300 million people, extremely rich and extremely diverse and extremely wealthy and extremely important strategically and for many, many other reasons which had to offer. These two things. Otherwise, research, academic progress, economic development, any kind of offering of medical inventions despite the riches. If a country like Saudi Arabia, if they wanted to build 1,000 hospitals, which could count as the top 1,000 hospitals in the entire world, they could. If a country like the United Arab Emirates wanted to build and construct 50 universities in which thousands upon thousands of students could attain the best level of academia the entire world has to offer, they could. Yet, none of that. None of that. You'd think that those riches would go to even, never mind academic prosperity, never mind healthcare. How about sports? How many of us have seen a decent football team emerge from that particular land? How many of us have seen a worldwide actor, a famous actor or actress or singer or the such that has come from that world? Artist, drawer, painter, anything. Philosopher even. Nothing. Nothing. And the reason for this is, and this is we have to understand, success cannot be born out of a sterile, futile environment. You can't expect a desert, a totally deserted, neglected desert, to produce any kind of fruit tree. You can't. It's impossible. And therefore, when we talk about development, when we talk about academic progress, when we talk about healthcare of world standards, it doesn't come in isolation. You have to build the environment that allows for such progress and success to be made. This is extremely important. You can't build an island. Today we don't live in total isolation of all our environments. I have seen so many projects, extremely ambitious, totally beautiful, done according to the best, project management scriptures that you can ever imagine. About educational villages, for instance, in Saudi Arabia or in Jordan, entities that have the best healthcare and the such in countries like the United Arab Emirates and the such. And my constant question to these people is that, okay, where are you going to get your electricity from? Where are you going to get your water supplies from? Who's going to build those facilities? Who's going to create the laws that are going to govern that particular entity? Where are you going to get the people who work, administer, and benefit from those facilities? You're going to get them from the mediocre, failed environment within which you exist. And therefore, your chances of success are extremely limited. Very, very limited. You could achieve a certain level of success, but would that success be comparable to the kind of resources that you'd be putting in? Very, very difficult indeed. So this part of the world was like this. all of a sudden, I have to tell you this, late December 2010, actually mid-December 2010, I was sitting with a group of intellectuals, academics, university professors in Saudi Arabia. And we were sort of scouring and examining the Arab world, going from country to country and the problems and the challenges and the failures and the such. At the very end, a professor, someone who's a very close friend of mine, he said, you know what, it seems that the Arab people are dead. He said, because the sign of life are two things, movement and growth. So if neither is happening, then it means that that entity, that thing, that cell is dead. If it's neither moving, nor is it growing, then it means that there is a state of death. Only 2 weeks later, we saw what happened in Tunisia. We saw a people rise in a manner that the whole region had never seen before. Like I said, we've seen several revolutions, bloody revolutions, but never a peaceful, civil revolution the way that we said. By the way, it's very important also, just before I come to this point, it's very important also to analyze how the West generally, the West, perceived that particular region and those people in its scriptures, in its manuscripts, in its texts, in its poems, its works of art, and its political analysis and the such. And essentially, whenever I used to, during the past 15, 20 years, whenever I used to go and travel to Washington or to go to Paris and speak at think tanks across Europe and the such, I would be confronted with a very, very similar, if not identical, analysis and a picture drawn about these people. And that the fact is, when I, for instance, used to speak about the need to support people's movement for change, often, the kind of reservation was, well, the problem is that, yes, these rulers are really bad. They're bad people. They're dictators and they're corrupt and they're stealing the country's wealth. Yes, but the thing is that if they were to be removed, then the people would create, first of all, institutions and governments and regimes similar to Al-Qaeda. They would be people who are extreme, violent, bloodthirsty, vengeful. They would suppress and subjugate women. They would not allow free speech. They would eradicate all other faiths and all other religions. They wouldn't be able to deal with modern notions of democracy and state building and civil societies. They would shut down on media freedoms. They wouldn't allow any kind of expression of freedom of speech or opposition or the such. All these things, the same that I'm sure that we've all heard. And this was a similar picture. By the way, even if you go back to the memoirs, for instance, and the autobiography of Colin Powell, the former American Secretary of State during the Iraq War, one of the things he mentions is a meeting, and he used to speak of Hosni Mubarak as a close friend. And he says that in one of the meetings with Hosni Mubarak in the mid-90s, he carried, just before he ended his term, around 2002, 2003, he said, I was having a discussion with Hosni Mubarak, with President Mubarak, and I spoke to him about the need for democratic reform. Remember, at the time, after 9/11, there was this grand project about the democratization of formation of the region. And he said that, I spoke to him, I said, the importance of democracy. He said, President Mubarak stopped me mid-speech. And he leaned over to me and he said, Mr. Secretary, do you want the Islamists, and particularly the Muslim Brotherhoods, to come to rule? Because that's what's going to happen if we enforce democratic reforms. He said, so I stopped, and then we moved to lunch. Even the memoirs of politicians, French and British and others, that said that we used to speak to certain leaders across the Arab world and telling them, you need to increase more freedoms, and they would say, well, if we gave our own people freedoms, you would find the savages ruling the streets and ruling governments and the such, and they would be, they would kill and they would... These rulers themselves, they never ever transformed to the world a positive image of their own people whom they ruled. And this is, by the way, this is the psyche of a dictator. someone who is an oppressor, always has an essential interest in conveying that, yes, you might not like me, but I'm the best thing, to rule this country, because otherwise the savages would come and rule. That's the way in order to preserve. And that was, unfortunately, quite stupidly adopted by the West as a policy. And that is, yes, these people are bad, they're corrupt, we know all about their dealings and their corruption and their shenanigans. But, the alternative is much, much worse. That's what the psyche was. Now, what's happened, and this is where I come to the concept of the Arab Spring. What's happened from 2011, from actually late December of 2010 in Tunisia, and then in Egypt in February of 2011, and then in Libya and the such, is that that picture was shattered to 1,000, possibly even 1,000,000 pieces. Because what we saw was not violent, armed, bloody, savage protests. We actually saw quite honorable, humane, peaceful, civil protests, whereby people said, we're going to hit the main squares and we're going to sit there. Do what you may. Shoot us down if you wish, bring in the tanks if you want, but we're not moving. And we're not going to fight you back. We're not going to aim any guns at you. We don't have any guns. We're going to bring out our wives, our children, our husbands, our elderly, our ill. We're going to bring them all out just to prove to you that we are serious about this. And that we don't want to be shot, and we don't want to shoot back. We are doing this peacefully. That is how these regimes collapsed. And it shocked the world, simply because, first of all, it was spontaneous. There wasn't any preparation for it. There wasn't any pre-advert on the date so-and-so, please head to your nearest main square and bring in your food and drink because you might be staying there for the next week or so. No, there was no such announcement, pre-notice. It was spontaneous. And by the way, just on this particular point, I'm often confronted with the claim or the thesis that the Arab Spring was a revolution of the hungry, or the revolution of the poor, and this is what will create these popular revolutions. I actually disagree, and for the reason that the Arab Spring was sparked, if you remember, by a young Tunisian man, burning himself alive in front, Mohammed al-Bouazizi, in a remote town in Tunisia. This sparked this whole cycle. Now, why did Mohammed al-Bouazizi do what he did? Mohammed al-Bouazizi was, as hundreds of thousands of other young men, unemployed, living in abject poverty. What he used to do is that every day he would leave his house and he would have a wheelbarrow. He would have a wooden cart and he would sell fruit and vegetable that he would buy for some pennies. Generally speaking, if on a good day he sold everything in his cart, he would take home something like $7 to $8 if he had a very good day. That was the kind of person he was. And every day he would hit the streets and try to sell his crop. On one particular day, a policewoman approached him and told him to move. And he asked her, he said, why should I move? Am I doing anything wrong? There is nothing wrong. I'm not impeding anyone. I'm not in a restrictive area. Why should I move? And they had a discussion. And that discussion turned to an argument. And because this policewoman knew that she belonged to the state, whereby the state could do anything it wants, she slapped him. She slapped him. In protest of this, he went and burnt himself alive in front of the main police station, and that is what started the riots and the protests. Mohammed al-Bouazizi had fully accepted the way in which he was living. He fully accepted that at the best of times he was going to make $7 to $8 a day on a very, very good day. Probably on most days much, much less. And he was willing to accept that. In fact, that's all he demanded. But the thing that led him to do what he did was dignity, was the slapping across the face. That is what led him to do what he did. So the revolution is not about hunger, because people, as angry as they are, as frustrated as they are, they're willing to live in hunger as long as they can uphold their dignity and their humanity. And that was the final straw, if you wish, and that is what brought all this. So in a matter of days, these Arab people that were known to be savages, primitives, most inclined to be violent and bloody, most inclined to subjugate women and suppress them, most inclined to use force in order to bring forward their own position, most likely to align themselves to Al-Qaeda, most likely to adopt a speech that is in animosity and quite hostile to the West and the such, actually turned out to be anything but, because the changes were brought about by a different set of notions. You see, because the thing is, and I always tell people this, even some young Muslims who are on the fringes of turning into or being sucked into violence, I speak to them and I give them this example, and I say what happened in the Arab Spring is an extremely important lesson, because armies, as powerful as they are extremely well trained in fighting armies, in fighting guns, because all it takes is to get a bigger gun. You have a gun, I have a bigger gun. You have a big gun, I have a tank. You have a tank, I have a fighter jet. Well, it's very, and people are trained. Troops, military forces and the such, security elements, they're trained in that. What they have no idea, and they are absolutely not trained to fight, is a civil protest. Is a protest where people come to them without any guns, without any knives, with their bare chests. So what do? You shoot 1, you shoot 10, you shoot 100, you shoot 1,000, and then what? What do you do then? They keep on coming, they keep on coming, and they keep on coming. No army is trained to face that. No army is trained to face that. And that's why, by the way, that's why we have the new concept of drones. Because however disciplined as a military you are, you cannot be asked to kill hundreds of people. However patriotic you feel, you cannot humanely, physically even, do something that will lead to the death of hundreds and thousands in an arbitrary way. Drones, however, is a computer game. Much, much simpler, much, much easier. You don't see your victims in the face. You don't look at them in the eye. It's therefore far easier to kill people from high up, because their numbers, their figures, their crosses and hairlines on a screen. It's very, very easy, very simple. So the best way to fight someone who is a militarized bully is by peaceful protest. I am a firm believer in that, because we saw it happen. No attempted coup could ever uninstall or depose of Hosni Mubarak. Not even the assassination of his boss in 1981 could bring down the regime. But a civilian protest could. So this is something which is extremely important. Now, I want to, just in the final few minutes, because I'm wary of time, in the final few minutes I'd just like to pose a couple of things. The first is, the real question, and I would have loved to have more time to go into details about what's happening in Egypt, what's happening in Syria, what's happened in Libya, for instance. But I think that two main points which I am quite keen on conveying to you. The first is, the question that really emerges from the Arab Spring, to me as an analyst, and to most people who are watching, and to the people on the ground, by the way, because sometimes we talk too much about politics and governments and elections and the such, and we forget the tens, possibly hundreds of millions of people on the ground who are suffering every single day. And it's the question that is being asked today is whether the Western world, particularly the Western world, but the world at large, actually believes in the concept of democracy. This is a question that we must press on Western governments particularly, and especially major governments like the United States, like the UK, like the European Union and the such. Because time after time after time, we are being told, not by words, but by actions, that the West likes the idea of a democracy in those regions where there are immense riches and geopolitical importances and significance. It likes the idea of democracy, but it has a particular vision on how democracy should shape up. So a free and fair election that could result in a political party or a bloc or an idea to win that is to the dislike of the West, then that democracy doesn't really work. And it could easily be suppressed and crushed. And I'll give you several examples. Way back in 1991, Algeria, the first round of elections, we had a landslide win by FIS, by the Islamic Front Party. Within a matter of hours, the army, supported by France particularly, but the West generally, enters the streets, takes control, annuls and cancels the elections, and then we have 20 years of a cycle of violence like we've seldom seen, that claims the lives of more than 1 million civilians in savagery attacks in remote areas like we've never ever seen before. A country that was once fairly prosperous that was reduced to rubble. And the West watched and did absolutely nothing. Second example, 2006, in Palestine. The Palestinian people vote for the very first free and fair elections in the Arab world since Algeria. And they win, and the people who win are Hamas. And the West decides to punish the Palestinian people for their free and democratic choice by closing down and severing its ties with the Palestinian authorities, ultimately leading to the fracture of Palestine or the occupied territories, and then imposing a siege on Gaza. Basically telling the Palestinians, we are punishing you for ever believing that we thought that it was appropriate to have a free and fair choice in the democratic elections. And then we had the examples of Egypt, of Tunisia, and particularly Egypt, whereby, again, we had the free and fair elections, and we had the very first civil, freely elected president in Egypt since the formation of the modern Egyptian state, ever, in its entire life, Egypt. While instead of the West and the world celebrating this, regardless of whether I like the guy or not, instead of celebrating this, they did absolutely everything to undermine him, his government, the Egyptian authority, and ultimately stood by and watched as a military coup crushed that democratic experiment, killing thousands in its midst, closing down all elements of freedom, of free speech, shutting down within a matter of minutes dozens of media outlets, TV, radios and papers, arresting more than 20,000 political prisoners, as we saw, condemning hundreds in one go to execution in kangaroo courts, and the West watching and doing absolutely nothing. So the question that people are now asking themselves, does the world and the West particularly actually believe in democracy, or don't they? Now this, I say, is extremely important for a number of reasons, not least because the Arab Spring and the way in which changes were brought about were the most perfect, the best, the most efficient antithesis to the ideology of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda and the violent groups, the militant groups, who forever preach to young Muslims that you will never ever be able to bring any kind of real change unless you use guns and grenades and blow yourself up. The Arab Spring proved that they were wrong. And it was the best example proven. America couldn't fight Al-Qaeda, couldn't win over Al-Qaeda. The whole world couldn't beat Al-Qaeda. The Arab Spring, within a matter of days, at the hands of unarmed men and women across the Arab world, they managed to destroy the ideology of Al-Qaeda. However, what happens now in Egypt has once again proven to many millions of young Muslims, and not only Muslims. I'm getting messages from Cuba, I'm getting messages from Russia, I'm getting messages from Indonesia, from South Africa, from non-Muslim youngsters saying, the only way is by carrying guns. That's the only way. That's the message that I'm getting. That's the message that the West has sent. Democracy doesn't work. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. So this question about whether we're true about democracy needs to be asked. And I think that in the session that we had on Saturday as well as on Sunday, we kept asking this question and making the assertion that we need to stop asking the question that we've been asking for 20, 30 years. Is Islam compatible with democracy? That question should never be asked again. The question that we should ask, is the West serious about democracy when it sometimes brings out an outcome that is anti-democratic? That is not to its best interest. This is a very, very important notion that we need to pay attention to. The other point that I think is quite important is what Dr. Ahmed Farouk mentioned in his introduction, and that is the Arab Spring and its impact on political Islam, on the concept of political Islam. Now, again, this is quite a vast subject, and I only have a couple of minutes. Very simply, I would say this. One of the things we had hoped from the Arab Spring and the emergence of political Islamic parties, whether they be Al-Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood, whether they be Al-Nahda, whether they be the Al-Haraka Al-Islamiyya, those who committed themselves to the democratic process, okay? It was a chance from them to move from being underground, theorizing, being idealistic, utopian, to working in the light of day, in public, engaging with others, and testing those ideas, whether they work or not. This was the best possible opportunity for political Islam to be tried and tested. I'm often told whenever I go to Congress or in London's Parliament, oh no, political Islam, when they come, they'll be absolutely anti-democratic. It's like someone climbing the ladder and then kicking the ladder away so that no one else climbs. They just use democracy. Well, have we tried them? Try them out. Try them out. Oh, when Islamists come to power, they will enforce, they will force women to wear hijab. They will ban alcohol consumption. They will. I say, but they didn't do that in Gaza, and they had the chance to. In Gaza, they're ruling. Hamas is ruling. But no woman was forced to wear hijab. I went to Gaza on a couple of occasions. There are women who are freely wearing hijab and others who aren't. No one is telling them that they must. And there is also, as I hear, several alcohol vendors in Gaza. So the experiments tell us that that is not true, but give them a chance. Try them out. See whether that's true. Because until now, the whole narrative and theory about political Islam has been done away. It's like me sitting in my desk, on my desk, in my office, for hours and hours writing a book about how to drive a car, when I never actually get myself into a car and try it out myself. You need to try it out to see whether that theory is correct or not. I'll change my ideas, I'll change my thoughts. Whenever, this is a rule, whenever people are forced into the public domain, told to engage, told to deal with all the challenges that real life, real politics throws upon them, you will find that many of their idealistic notions will be tamed, will be moderated, will come to the mainstream. They will be compromised. And then they'll go back to the theories and rewrite them again. We needed that chance for that to happen. But now we've shut down that experiment. Unfortunately, I expect that we can see, or we will see, another wave of extremist views that will resent the experiment that was failed and scuppered and killed, and will adopt new ideas and new notions that are not to the best interest of anyone whatsoever. The West and the international community have by far missed an incredible opportunity to resolve many of the problems that it has today on the level of ideology, security, stability, Al-Qaeda, all these things. But it seems that there was either a stupid or a deliberate attempt to close this experiment down. There is so much more that I would have liked to say. I would have liked to shed light on the Tunisian experiment, because Dr. Azmi spoke about it a little bit, about Libya, and Libya is in the news today. But unfortunately, we're out of time, so I will hand back to Dr. Ahmed Farouk, and I thank you for your listening attentively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anas.